Kingdom Hearts 2's popularity as a speedrunning game has always fascinated me. I was like 12 when I first played this, so most of the depth in the combat system went way over my head. Yeah, I guess I was on the same page as IGN there, mash X to win, press triangle for victory royale. But then you look at speedrunners doing all this crazy nonsense and just think, why? Much has been made of how KH2's design and lack of challenge do a poor job of incentivizing you to wade through this monstrosity to explore all your options. And I get it, if you want to get through the game faster, or when you're on a higher difficulty, that's when you gotta use all the moves at your disposal, bro. But does that really explain how the combat is deep or interesting? Look at this situation in DMC3. I'm surrounded by a group of enemies. Do I A. use a crowd control weapon like Cerberus, B. launch an enemy into the air where the other guys can't hit me, or C. trickster the hell out of there and snipe them from afar? The answer is all three are correct. It's not like the game is telling me to use this key on that lock, that's not depth. Every tool has some kind of unique property, and that means they all have different uses depending on the situation. And in the best combat systems, every possible choice branches off into a million trillion more possible choices. Even a moveset as basic as the original Devil May Cry can support a variety of interesting scenarios. Do I try to deflect Phantom's projectiles? Do I attack from the front? Do I jump on its back? Maybe using Ifrit will let me land there more easily, etc, etc. I know this sounds like basic stuff, but so many games still kinda get it wrong. Explaining why a combat system is good isn't easy, so get ready for a lot of comparisons to other games as I try to make it more clear over the course of this video. Kingdom Hearts 2 isn't deep because it has a million moves, it's because, well, I'm gonna explain why now. Let's rock. Even within its own series, KH2 is often singled out as a bit of a button masher, and yeah, that's in part because it's so forgiving on the standard difficulty. But I think it also has to do with how these games control. Unlike most hack and slashers where the lock-on only gently directs your attacks toward a single foe, in Kingdom Hearts it dictates the entire pace of the combat. If you target an airborne opponent and press the attack button, Sora will leap into the air by himself to close the gap. Once he's leveled up enough, a single button press will turn Sora into a wild buzzsaw crossing huge distances with ease, and yeah, that can make the combat feel kind of automated if you don't think about it too hard. But it also gives the game a unique flow where you zip in and out of attacks at a moment's notice. If you see an opening, you can go into punish immediately. The fact you don't even have to jump to start an air combo means that there's never any downtime. Even just on a fundamental level, Sora feels incredibly crisp and satisfying to control, with just the right amount of wind-up to make every attack quick and weighty. And even though it looks so ostensibly simple and mashy, KH2 actually gives you a lot of freedom in how you assemble your combos. You can tack on extra attacks to keep enemies juggled for longer, or you can equip the combo minus ability to get to your finishers faster, which is useful for crowds. Somewhat like Capcom's God Hand, not every possible combo is always fit for purpose. You can absolutely screw yourself over if you equip every move randomly. Depending on your preference, you might even want to choose not to use flashier aerial finishers just to get back to the ground faster. It all has pros and cons. There's even an ability that takes away your finishers and, in theory, lets you do infinite juggles. They really thought of everything. The fact you have to think about your loadout in this way before every fight lets KH2 bridge the gap between action game and RPG while keeping the pace of the combat fast and approachable. And this aspect is something we'll come back to later in the video. Now, the original Kingdom Hearts might be the first full 3D game with true air combos, maybe? The original Devil May Cry didn't have air combos, and KH1 actually predates both Otogi and Ninja Gaiden. In the first game, air combos are much faster than attacking from the ground, but their presence is mostly only necessitated by the enemy design. Sora has to face a lot of flying enemies and huge bosses, so sometimes you just gotta jump. KH2 then joins the big boy action game club with the addition of launchers. Pressing the square button in the middle of a ground combo will shoot the enemy upwards, and being the good boy that he is, Sora will go after them instantly if you follow up with a regular attack. Later, you even learn a move called Finishing Leap that can only be used at the end of a combo, and the hitbox is so wide that it lets you bypass an enemy's defenses and launch entire crowds. If you watch speedruns of KH2, you'll notice that in the early game, advanced players tend to skip the finisher and instead start the combo again from the beginning. That's because a full combo doesn't actually kill a lot of the time and only knocks the enemy away, which wastes time. So once you gain access to launchers, they can become a more elegant way of extending your combos. As you unlock more abilities, you get into interesting choice dilemmas where a ground finisher might be super strong, but staying in the air lets you avoid damage more easily in mob fights. An especially nice touch is how when you're doing an air combo, Sora won't actually touch the ground until you stop attacking. He will stay airborne as the momentum of every single attack sends him gliding along the floor. It doesn't just feel great, it gives you the freedom to choose whether to let your aerial finisher play out or move to a ground combo instead. With action combat like this, enemy hit reactions are often where the depth of a game starts to reveal itself. Choosing between a billion different moves when they all just do damage and not much else isn't very interesting. Even at its most basic level then, KH2 can provide scenarios similar to my DMC3 example from earlier. Sometimes you want to knock dudes away and create breathing room, other times keeping a single guy suspended in the air is more advantageous, but it gets even more interesting once you add magic into the mix. In KH1, you get a bunch of elemental spells that do different kinds of damage, but it's not like picking the right one for a different colored enemy is much of a choice, is it? Stop freezes enemies, Cure heals, and Arrow lets you tank more damage. You're not thinking very much about which one to use depending on the situation, right? You cast them when you can, and you don't if you don't. KH2 flips this concept completely on its head. The first spell you receive is Blizzard, and it's a projectile like last time. I think the usefulness of that is pretty self-evident. But then you learn Fire, and whoa, it's this weird swirly thing now? So when the game puts you up against the basic shadow enemies shortly after, you'll realize you can use it for crowd control. I know the speedrunners really hate it when the shadows merge with the ground like that, but the way the Fire's hitbox lingers around Sora means they'll be caught in it the moment they rise back up. So that's what the game is trying to teach you. Thunder now launches enemies, and Sora's movement range is so godlike by the mid-game that you can go straight into an air combo from there, even if you're far away. The game almost has a bit of a Bayonetta thing going on here, where you can either set up a melee combo to eventually get to your launch move for free, or spend some magic instead to do it instantly. Cure does what you think it does. I'm gonna talk more about it later, but Reflect and Magnet are where it gets interesting. Reflects damage back onto the enemy, and Magnet groups them all together, so nothing shocking there. But both of these spells are a perfect showcase for one of KH2's most interesting features. Magic and melee attacks can combo into each other. Just like your Keyblade swings, spells are cast in a sequence of regular attacks, which then ends in a strong finisher. Sora isn't able to cancel the recovery of his attacks with a dodge or a block, but since Reflect counts as an attack, you can use it in the middle of a combo. And yes, even this defensive move has its own finisher when used at the very end, which, holy shit. Magnet is unique in that it always counts as a finisher, and the game has an ability called Finishing Plus that lets you use 2 finishers in a row. You see where I'm going with this? You can bunch the enemies together and then go straight into a devastating thunder finisher. Or you can use Finishing Leap to start an air combo. A lot of action games have this problem where these kinds of attacks can feel disconnected from the rest of the combat system. It's not like you need to set up your big fireball with a melee attack or something in Ninja Gaiden. You kinda just throw it out to create breathing room and because you can. Which is fine, but the synergy between the different elements in KH2, thanks to this one extra touch, is amazing. The thing you'll have to be mindful of when using moves like Magnet though is their MP cost. In KH1, MP cost was pretty equivalent between all the different spells, but here just casting Cure will take out your entire bar. And that's because there is a cooldown whenever it hits 0, at the end of which your MP will be completely restored. So, I know gushing about a frickin' MP bar in a JRPG will make me sound like a big nerd, but this has to be one of the most genius and well-balanced systems I've ever encountered in an action game. There really is no one correct way to handle this sort of thing. Asking players to build meter themselves by attacking like in KH1 rewards skillful play, but if it's balanced poorly, it can make the resource in question so precious that you're always going to save it for the one option that's clearly the best in every situation. Cooldown mechanics let the player be a bit more liberal with their moves, but it can also remove any thought from the equation. You kinda just throw them out willy-nilly because you know you're gonna get them back. And when you're birthed by sleep, then yeah. KH2 has the best of both approaches in many ways. Yes, your MP does recharge by itself after it's used up, but since every spell is governed by this one bar, you really have to think carefully about what you fit in there before that happens. Sora is frozen to the ground when he casts a spell, and they're really slow in the air, and like I discussed earlier, their individual uses are incredibly specific. 0.2 uses the same MP recharge system, but in that game I would always find myself throwing out fireballs like they're nothing because they're so strong and so precise that your timing really doesn't matter, and the sooner your MP hits 0, the sooner you'll get it back. KH2 has you putting a lot more thought into how and when to use your spells, but what really pulls it together is how Cure is balanced. I just mentioned how casting the healing spell uses up all of your MP, so when your bar is completely full, or you only have a sliver left, either is enough to heal up. This alone adds this huge extra layer of decision making to combat. If you are at critical health but have full MP left, what do? Do you play it safe and heal up? Because that means you're gonna be kind of naked for a while without your reflect and crowd control spells. You could try being a lad and getting the most out of your magic before you heal. The fact you're about to die will make you think about your moves differently. Maybe it's best for now to just create breathing room with Magnet. Do you camp for a bit with Blizzard, or do you get risky and bait out an attack for a full reflect counter? Either way, you're gonna have to use up your magic eventually, so what do you do once that happens? So, once this bar here is filled up enough, Sora can pull his devil trigger, except there's like 5 different devil triggers. Yes, suddenly those comparison memes are starting to sound a lot more accurate. This little explosion thing that knocks enemies into the air looks pretty familiar. Guess you can add Kingdom Hearts 2 to the list of games Itsuno ripped off when he was making DMC4. The drive system isn't some brainless linear power-up. Each of the 5 forms lets Sora specialize in a single category while compromising in other aspects. Valor lets you go straight into finishers, great for dealing with crowds and larger enemies, but the lack of magic or any defensive options make it incredibly risky if you're not precise with your attacks. Wisdom is the exact opposite. You're trading melee strikes for weaker lasers, but coupled with the glidey movement, it's a great way to camp enemies out when you're feeling overwhelmed. With Valor, you're likely gonna use that initial explosion to set up an air combo, whereas here it creates enough breathing room to let you get to safety. This one tiny thing can have completely different uses depending on the context, and that's amazing. Wisdom also finally lets you cast spells and move at the same time, and that makes you think about every new move in a totally new way. Fire and Thunder become so much more deadly when they can cover the entire arena. It's once again remarkable how well the system is balanced and how perfectly it slots into the rest of the combat system. Using Wisdom or Valor benches either Donald or Goofy respectively, but they don't cost a lot of drive. Limit Form uses up more of your gauge, but it can be activated even when Sora is by himself, which is such an obvious thing to want that it shocks me it wasn't in the vanilla version of the game. Master and Final come without a lot of the drawbacks associated with the other transformations, and feature even more unique tweaks to melee combos and magic, but they also deplete your drive rapidly. Going into any drive form restores Sora's health and magic completely, and that alone can often be reason enough to go for it, though going into Valor or Limit locks you out of using magic. It's not without risk. There's one final touch that really rounds this whole system off. When you're in MP recharge, attacking enemies will add to your drive gauge like crazy. I'm struggling to emphasize just how important this mechanic is. This one addition puts KH2's combat from like a 9 to a full-on 10 out of 10. With how the magic system is balanced, you'd think MP recharge is when you're supposed to go back on the defensive while you wait for it to be done, but it's the exact opposite. Now you really want to put your all into those melee combos to take full advantage of it. It completely changes how you think about Sora's moveset at any given moment. Sometimes I went all out with my magic to deliberately go into MP recharge because I wanted to recover my drive for a difficult phase in a boss fight. I'm always incentivized to take risks because I know it will work out if I just play well enough and use all the tools at my disposal. You're at critical health with no MP left, so you start wailing on the enemy to go into limit form and regain your strength. You could then revert immediately to get your magic back, including your healing spells, but then you realize you could take it a step further and use Sonic Grave to clear the room, or Strike Rate to keep enemies at a distance. You don't get your MP back when your drive runs out, so it's not an easy choice. There are always so many things to consider, and the combat has such a natural ebb and flow. It's just so... Now, Kingdom Hearts is an RPG, which is worth considering. Sora can only have 6 consumables equipped at a time by the endgame, and you'd be surprised how hard it is to trivialize the combat with healing items. There's only one more tool at your disposal, ultimately you just gotta get good. One of the reasons why Limit Form was such an important addition in Final Mix is that you really can't rely on your party members to, stay alive. This sort of thing would definitely take away from the purity of a full-on action game like DMC. You don't want to have to deal with too many elements outside of your control, but KH2 toes the line between hack and slash and RPG as well as you could hope for here. If you want Donald to heal you when the going gets tough, consider just playing better in the early phase of a fight. I'm not sure I have a full understanding of how stats work in this game, but that kinda just shows how well they're implemented. You have lots of ways to deal a ton of damage against mobs, and enemy health is actually scaled to your level in boss fights. This game is so well balanced that level 1 runs on the highest difficulty aren't only possible, but also encouraged by the game's design. I'm too much of a wuss to try it though. I'm a lot more mixed on how abilities are doled out. Growth abilities acquired by using your drive forms are a good idea because that way you're not at the mercy of EXP grinding, and the same thing goes for giving out new moves at key story moments. Having to go without a dodge roll for so long really stinks though. Even KH1 gave it to you super early. Even in the early game, a lot of moves just can't be blocked. Birth by Sleep and Dream Drop Distance had the right idea by making dodge roll available from the very beginning. Don't get used to me saying good things about those games. There are also a bunch of upgrades that just make Sora easier to control. Objective improvements that expand your movement range and agility. The whole point of a progression system like this is to not overwhelm the player with too many options at once by spreading new moves out over the course of the game. And this ain't it, Chief. I can live without stuff like aerial dive or slap shot for a while, but when you get combo master in like the final level, you really have to wonder why the game doesn't just work like this from the word go. So, while KH2 doesn't stick the landing quite perfectly with its RPG elements, it's worth drawing comparisons to other games to see how far it still manages to tower above the rest. There are no inflated health pools here, no enemies tanking through all of your attacks. Kingdom Hearts as a series tends to be pulled in a lot of weird directions, but as far as 2's combat goes, there's a very pure mechanical focus. Battles are not decided by how much time you spend level grinding, but instead your reflexes and brain power. And nowhere does this become more clear than on critical mode. Nier Automata has poorly thought out core mechanics, which are then further broken by RPG stat bullshit, and it reaches a point where the endgame, even on normal, becomes an unfun, tedious slog. So I don't even want to know what the higher difficulties look like here, but with KH2, it's the only way to go, baby. The best action games tend to go for remixed enemy placements and behavior along with some kind of big mechanical twist, and I'm not sure if that was really an option in a linear RPG like this. The critical mode approach might seem a bit quaint on first blush then. Enemies do double damage, Sora's maximum health is halved, and EXP growth is slower, but your damage output is also increased, and you start out with a bunch of extra abilities, the two most important being Finishing Plus and MP Haste. Critical mode doesn't buff Sora in a linear way to give you more of a fighting chance. Instead, the pace of every fight is completely turbocharged. Having two finishers from the start lets you be way more flexible in how you assemble your combos throughout the entire game. Those magnet strats are so much more viable here. You get to use magic a lot more recklessly, but a shorter MP recharge also means a shorter window to recover your drive. You have to be relentless in your attacks. Every fight turns into this lightning-fast ballet of death. It's incredibly satisfying to pay attention to enemy tells and then get to go for these huge punishes. The synergy between all of KH2's mechanics and systems is extremely impressive, but you only really have to take advantage of it with how quickly everything dies on this difficulty, including yourself. You come to appreciate how memorable and easy to read the enemy design is. These dancer grabs now one-shot you, so you might want to use magnets or try to bait them into an explosion finisher. It's also remarkably fair for the most part. Sephiroth, for example, will launch you into an air combo with this revenge attack, but the first hit isn't actually that punishing, and the combo is very easy to break out of using retaliating slash. Oh yeah, I guess I should talk about revenge values. KH2 features a wide variety of humanoid bosses, and all of them can be staggered and juggled. To prevent you from comboing them infinitely, there's this hidden system in place referred to as revenge value by players. Imagine Roxas here has an invisible meter keeping track of every hit I land in quick succession. Every one of Sora's attacks has a value assigned to it, so every successful hit adds to that gauge. Once I exceed the top level of the gauge, Roxas will enter a state referred to as Forced Revenge and retaliate immediately. His AI will usually pick from a pool of different moves depending on the situation, but in Forced Revenge, that pool will be limited to one or two possible attacks, which are again different depending on whether he's on the ground or in the air. If I go easy on the attacks for a while, the gauge will cool off, and there's a bunch of moves that won't add any revenge value. So, okay, I get why a system like this needs to be in place to allow players to stagger bosses and not turn the game into a frustrating nightmare trip. I'm just not sure it had to be this system. Going back to that Roxas example, I do a full combo, my finisher launches him, and then when he enters Forced Revenge, I actually do get enough time for a reflect. I'd say the system is working as intended here. In most action game boss fights of this nature, the challenge is to find an opening, lay the smackdown as much as possible, and then prepare for the boss to retaliate, rinse, repeat. You can see that Virgil here has some kind of damage cap. If I hit him enough times, he'll be knocked away at one point and then teleport behind me for a starfall counter. Once he lands, he's aggressive enough that I can't just stagger him again immediately. I'll have to wait for my chance to strike. So there's no way to just combo him infinitely, but at the same time, his counterattacks aren't so fast that I have no chance to avoid them. In KH2, if you hit the revenge value even a little bit earlier than expected, you'll be dead before you know it, man. Considering how difficult it is to defend mid-combo in KH2, it's kind of insane how fast some of these moves come out. I have a hard time discerning the exact logic here. I think Sephiroth, for example, gives you enough time to prepare for his attack when he teleports out of your combo, and his audio cues are pretty clear. I wish the camera didn't break lock on when he does it though. But then if you poke Marluxia a few too many times, he'll massacre you instantly. The safest way to fight then is to just go easy on the combos and try to feel out that revenge value so that you don't hit it, which to me is not intuitive at all. At this point, you're not responding to the boss anymore, you're fighting this invisible algorithmic overlord. I'm not sure if this would break anything, but I would highly prefer a damage cap system system like in other action games. And once you hit it, the boss will gently dodge out of your combo and counterattack in a reasonable way. Just make them a little bit harder to stagger and it should be fine. If you're bent on keeping the revenge value system, maybe you could have the bosses flash red faster and faster or something as you're tacking on damage, and make some of these counterattacks just a little bit easier to dodge, maybe. The way speedrunners exploit this system is really cool, and I realize it takes a lot of skill, but at the risk of sounding like the fun police, I would like to see people actually fight these guys, rather than looping the AI to death with some elaborate scheme, because goddammit, these bosses are cool as shit. It's worth noting that unless you're godlike, a lot of Sora's moves do become somewhat less viable, though you still have to think about your MP and reflect and drives and all that stuff. Some fights are pure tests of your reflexes and pattern recognition. Others rely on completely unique one-off mechanics, which I feel is a perfect way to compensate for the relative lack of options. It's kind of mind-blowing how many different bosses you get to fight in KH2. Most other action games could only dream of having this kind of variety. I could probably make an entire video about just the data org, but I ain't got time for that. What I will make time for, and don't worry, we're almost at the end, is reaction commands. People have made entire videos about why these are good, but I'm personally a lot more mixed. A big triangle prompt will appear to let you know that Sora can perform a sensitive to context action here, and there's often very little ambiguity over whether or not pressing triangle is a good idea. There are some where you can get yourself in trouble if you mess up the associated minigame, but generally it's always the #1 best option. Not only does the game not let you think for yourself here, it also takes away from the purity of the mechanics for me. Sephiroth has this move you can block with a reaction command, and while you can dodge or block normally, there's zero extra benefit for how wicked hard that is. Again, unless you're a speedrunner doing it for swag. Maybe you can play this sick animation if I just block normally and design the timing of the attack around that instead of turning it into a QTE. Maybe instead of randomly giving me the option to grab this little robot or insta-kill the samurai dude, you could make it available as a reward for doing enough damage or blocking at the right time. Ideally, instead of making triangle the QTE button, I'd rather just have a separate attack command on triangle and then press 2 buttons at the same time when the enemy flashes pink or something like in Dream Drop Distance. This is where I finally segue into my soapbox on KH2's controls. I've been holding this one in for years. There actually isn't a secondary attack button. Instead, you press the dodge/block command in the middle of a combo, and I don't know about you, but that's a lot to take care of for one poor square button. I'd rather have the two functions separated so that I can dodge or block more reliably out of a combo. In fact, there isn't even a primary attack button. Instead, X acts as the confirm function for the stupid dumb menu I briefly touched on in the intro. This thing has 2 separate pages you have to navigate with the D-pad to access all of Sora's options. And while they give you access to 4 customizable shortcuts with L1, which definitely helps a lot, it only puts into question for me if this command menu was even necessary in the first place. Let's say we move to the Japanese layout where X is jump, circle is now your primary attack, and triangle your secondary attack. Pressing both at the same time activates reaction commands. Hey, it works for Bayonetta. KH2 has a total of 6 spells, so how about we move the elemental attacks to a shortcut menu on the right trigger and the support spells to the left trigger? Holding both triggers simultaneously brings up another shortcut for your 4 summons on the D-pad and your limits on the face buttons. Yeah, I didn't really experiment with summons and I don't have time to talk about them, don't add me. L1 is now your drive button, so pressing and letting go activates limit form, while holding L1 and pressing a face button takes care of everything else. Switch your party members with left and right on the D-pad, scroll through Sora's items with down, and use the item with up. Pretty sure that's everything. This wouldn't just make the controls way more comfortable, it would also incentivize you to explore your options more. I I genuinely believe that the command menu is a huge barrier for people in that regard, and a big reason why they prefer to keep mashing X. Even so, I think the command menu in its current form is just so exemplary of Kingdom Hearts 2's combat as a whole. It's so eclectic and weird, and nothing is really implemented exactly like you would expect. Even blocking in these games is weird. You sort of just JoJo pose for a bit, and if the enemy combos you in that short window, you'll get enough iframes to travel to China. Yeah, I don't know about this analogy. It's a game you kind of have to meet halfway, and yeah, there are some lows too. But it also gives you highs you can't get anywhere else, with adrenaline-pumping fights that challenge your reflexes just as much as your ability to strategize, and game feel that's borderline addictive. And that's without a doubt what I would call a special game. Hello everybody, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I would also imagine that you're wondering where the hell I've been the last 2 months, if you only follow me on YouTube. And for that reason, I'm gonna do sort of an update, state of the channel vlog. I'm gonna record it like right after I hit render on the Kingdom Hearts video. But yeah, it should be going up at the same time. And there I'm gonna explain like what's been going on and what my upcoming projects are a little bit, maybe, without revealing too much. But yeah, again, I hope you liked the video. It's a whole thing. I'll tell you what happened soon. But yeah, for now, I'd be very grateful if you could share the video with your friends and leave a like and all that stuff, because that really helps out. And yeah, look forward to what I'm working on next.